All right, folks. How you doing? Hope you're doing well. Let me just make sure we're recording here. We are. Good. Oops. This is lesson 2. Hey, there's a couple issues that came up yesterday, and I will claim responsibility just because I did it, but there was some of you who couldn't see the just a couple of you who couldn't see the video. I'm going to try a couple different ways of uploading it, and if you can't find it, I'm going to also put a link. Or I'm sorry, if it doesn't load right, I'm going to also put a link so you can download it if you need to. Hopefully that won't be the issue. I'm going to change how I upload these in the future, but hopefully it'll work. Okay, I'm going to throw them directly up on YouTube instead of try to um, upload them right to the campus site. All right, so hopefully it will work better for you. Okay, so today is a little bit longer, and there will be a quiz again at the end, so make sure you watch through this. Some of you emailed me yesterday asking for the quiz code. The quiz code is going to be at the end, and these are one of those things where you can't really take the quiz unless you watch the video. So make sure you watch the video and take notes. So again, remember you were going to write stuff down in yellow. And so grab a sheet of paper and a pen, Sol, or pen, or whatever. And let's get started. You can pause me if you need to go get something, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Here we go. This is on Prince Shotoku. So yesterday we talked about uh, Jimmu, who was the first emperor of Japan by unifying Japan. And he created the first, well, really not the first, the only dynasty of Japanese history. That was in 660 BC is when he unified Japan. So now you can see the first line here. We're going to jump to 572 AD. So we're jumping ahead almost 900, a little over 900 years. So there's a lot of history that happened there. But like I said yesterday, if you remember, these are turning points in Japanese history, and this is a big giant one. So obviously to cover 2,500 years of Japanese history and 9 stories, I'm going to have to cut a couple things out. So here we go. The Young Prince. In 572, a boy with exceptional talents was born to a member of the royal family of Japan. He became known as Prince Shotoku, and it is said that by the time he was 4 months old, he was already speaking, and shortly after that, he could read and write. Now, I've been a parent of 2 kids, and the only thing I knew my kids could say at 4 months old was, something like that. So I'm not exactly sure how accurate this is. I have no doubt that Shotoku was a gifted child, but I'm not sure if he could. I don't know if it's physically possible to speak at 4 months old, and then shortly after that to be able to read and write. I'm not sure exactly how that happens, but a lot of cultures have stories that kind of get larger as time goes by. We call them legends or fables or um, tall tales or whatever. And Shotoku is a real person, and he was an exceptional young man. But as far as being 4 months old and speaking and reading and writing, I'm not exactly sure how accurate that is. But that's how the story goes. So we'll go ahead and go with that. But anyway, regardless of what age it was, he could definitely read and write, and he was looked at as a gifted kid. While still a young boy, he had learned all the scriptures of a religion that had recently been introduced to Japan. As his many great talents developed, people looked to him for guidance and leadership. This, to me, seems more strange than having him be able to read and write at 4 months old. That adults look to him for guidance and leadership. It'd be like me going to him and saying, "Hey, Prince Shotoku, listen, my wife and I are having troubles. I lost my job. I'm about to get evicted from my home. Do you have any advice for me?" It's like, "Well, Mr. Lane, I don't think that's very valid. But anyway, well, who knows? But people saw him as guidance and leadership. He was a good, wise kid, and he did. Now, next section is Buddhism, so write this down. Buddhism, remember writing in yellow. Write the stuff in yellow. The new religion that let me start over. The new religion that interested the prince was Buddhism. Now, we talked about Buddhism before spring break. You guys did that lesson where you had to look at the 3 different religions: Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. And Buddhism, remember, is about life is suffering until you attain nirvana, which is releasing all of earthly desires to become one with the way. And so that's what Buddhism preaches. So that was introduced to Japan. And although it was new to Japan, it had originated in India more than 1,000 years earlier. This is review for you. Buddhism was started by a member of the royal family of India who became known as the Buddha. Remember, his name was Siddhartha Gautama. His teachings gradually spread through China and into Korea. Then, as a gift to the Japanese, the Korean leader sent the Buddhist scriptures and a gold and copper image of the Buddha to the royal family. Prince Shotoku was very impressed with the teachings of the Buddha, and he sought to spread the religion through the country. Okay, so he, at a very young age, wanted to spread Buddhism. Shinto. The Japanese religion of Shinto had existed throughout the country from the early times of Jimmu. The belief that spirits existed in all things, living or not, was part of the religion. Building a shrine or leaving offerings for these spirits could help one in fishing, farming, and warfare. So the Shinto is the ancient religion. It's one of the oldest religions on the planet right now. It's very, very old. And it was, you believe that there's spirits in everything, living or non-living, and you would make an offering or a sacrifice to whatever spirit you wanted to help you with, farming, fishing, or whatever. Okay. So when the new religion of Buddhism was introduced into Japan, it was found to be compatible with the existing Shinto religion. The Japanese people happily could still practice their ancient Shinto and adopt the Buddhist religion that Prince Shotoku so admired. In Western culture, this isn't necessarily practiced so much. You can't necessarily say that, Judaism and Islam coexist. You can be both. You can't be a Muslim Jew or a Christian Muslim or whatever. They're pretty exclusive. And we talked about that back in the first semester when we talked about Islam. But in this culture, a lot of these religions can kind of interchange, and you can pull parts out of it. And so I believe that since Shinto could be practiced alongside Buddhism, Buddhism spread much more rapidly. If it wasn't that way, I don't think Buddhism would have spread as quickly as it did. But as you can see here, Buddhism does spread. So Prince Shotoku set about erecting temples and statues to the new religion. One great complex of temples was said to hold something quite special. Now here's another one of those stories that I think has grown over time, or happened, but it's remembered in a different way. The story was told that when the prince was a year old, while praying, the left eyeball of the Buddha appeared in his hands. So again, they're believing that this young child, is a 1-year-old, is at a temple praying. Again, I've had 2 1-year-olds in my life, and the only person praying when they're 1-year-old is a parent praying for them to just be quiet for a little bit, right, and get some rest. But the idea is that this young child had these exceptional gifts, and he was at the temple praying, and a left eyeball of the Buddha appeared in his hands. Now, it could truly be like this, where there's a miracle happened, and the eyeball appeared in the hands. Not like the real eyeball, is like from the statue. Or it could have been Shotoku was crawling around, and the eyeball, which is a jewel, had fallen out of this Buddha statue, and he happened to pick it up. And if you believe that a person, whether it's an old person or a young boy like this, has special gifts and talents, you're going to believe exceptional things. And so people who already believed that Shotoku had exceptional gifts, they see him and he's got the eyeball of the Buddha that had fallen out of the statue in his hand. They're going to believe that it's some type of a sign or a miracle. So later, that eyeball was placed at the temples, and soon the scriptures of Buddhism spread across Japan. Monasteries were constructed where people could devote their lives to studying the religion. All right. So, now, as a statesman, the prince became more than just a religious leader. He also had talents as a great statesman. His aunt was the empress when the prince was growing up. When Shotoku was 21 years old, she made him her regent, giving Shotoku her full confidence and total control over the government. So now we're getting into him as an adult. He's 21 years old, and this is different than a 21-year-old that now. My older son, will be 21 this summer, and I love him to death. You guys know that, but I couldn't imagine him running a country because that's just not our culture. 21 is college age or young working age, trying to figure things out. This is an older culture, different time, and so 21 was considered to be relatively adult. People weren't living as long either, so this was kind of approaching younger, middle age-ish or so of sorts. And so it was pretty. This does make sense time-wise. So he's 21 years old. She gives him control of the government, and basically lets him run things. The prince brought many teachers to Japan from Korea and China. He awarded teachers high social ranks in order to attract experts in astronomy, calendars, geography, medicine, and the sciences. The country awoke from the dark ages with this wealth of new information. So he said, hey, you know what? Teachers need to be held in high regard, which I totally agree with, right? He said, teachers need to be up there with the highest of society. So like in American culture, we place doctors and lawyers and pro athletes and actors and musicians and stuff up on the top tier of, because usually we base it on money, right? How much money people make. And so he wanted teachers to be in that same realm as the doctors and lawyers and pro football players and stuff, which again, I totally agree with. I think that we should start that like today. Okay, so start spreading the word. Um, so because of this, though, he began to attract teachers from all over, and in the sciences especially. You can look at the list there: astronomy, calendars, geography, medicine, science. That's all that. And so they began to really develop a whole new culture based on this. Now, accomplishments. The prince introduced the Chinese style of centralized government. So let me stop here for a second, and you're going to start to see a trend. We're going to see the Japanese, specifically under Shotoku and his leadership, and then eventually after him, leaders want to adopt the Chinese culture. And you're going to see them copy the Chinese culture a lot. We're going to see this again in several hundred years when the Japanese are going to copy Western culture, mainly United States, other countries in Europe. But for now, we're going to see them copy Chinese culture. So we're going to kind of keep a running tally. If I drop my mic here, hold on. Can you hear me? Okay. Going to kind of keep a running tally. By the way, I've got my feet up here in my basement with my Beats on, holding this little microphone thing to my face here. So hopefully you can hear me. Anyway, you guys probably didn't need to know that. I don't know, or maybe I could be sitting on a beach in Hawaii somewhere, but I'm not. That's not true because I can't travel anywhere. So I'm sitting. I should make like a video of me filming this and put me in like a background of like sitting. Like one day I'll be up on like Mount Everest, and then the next day I could be at the bottom of the ocean or something. That'd be cool. All right, I'm sorry, I digress. Just like in class, see, don't get me started. I'm going to start wandering. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to start looking at Chinese, how they start to copy the Chinese. The prince introduced the Chinese style of centralized government. Because centralized government means that they're going to collect all the government people, put them in one spot, and begin to really develop a kind of what we have, where there's different departments of government, and they kind of have one department over all, or I'm sorry, one government over all of China, or excuse me, Japan. In this case, it was China, but they're copying it, and then they have different departments that oversee different things, kind of like the president's cabinet, where there's a president and he has a bunch of different people that he meets with, departments of education, departments of transportation, and health and welfare, all that stuff, and that's kind of how this is. In fact, we copied a lot from this as well a long time ago. But he based his government on virtues of sincerity, love, and goodness, and used Buddhism as a peaceful, unifying religious force. Prince Shotoku wrote a code of law in his own hand using principles of philosophy learned from the Chinese. So here's two things already they copied from the Chinese: the type of government and then their philosophy behind that. So that's two things. We're going to keep a running list. It provided guidelines of moral conduct for statesmen to follow, providing for an amazing degree of justice for such early times. He created a lasting peace from a civilization used to continuous warfare. Prince Shotoku commanded such great confidence in the people of his country that there was very little resistance to his many changes. Can you imagine having a leader that has very little resistance? We haven't had that in a long time, and it's not this current president. It's been several presidents beyond. Can you imagine a president saying, here's what I want for the country, and almost everybody saying, yeah, we trust you, go for it. We just don't do that. And so imagine having that. I guess that would be great. I don't know if we've ever lived under that, but that's what happened here under Shotoku. Very little resistance. So the nation was saddened at his death from illness in 622 AD. So remember, it started in 572, so 622, so that's what about that? Is that, let's do some quick math. Is that 50 years, 60 years? Someone check me. I think it's 50 or 60 years. If I'm wrong, someone email me and tell me I'm wrong. Through his life, he introduced an age of enlightenment for his country of Japan. So he passes away, and now Japan is going to continue to follow his example. So there's going to be even more Chinese influence for the next century. How long is a century? You all said 100 years, right? So you're smart. So for the next century, 100 years, the Japanese continued to be fascinated with the much older Chinese culture. A type of university for Japanese royalty and friends was created. Chinese speech and writing was taught, and soon Chinese character writing was the preferred form of communication. So let's back up. There's a lot in this slide. So we already know they copied their form of government and their philosophy, but now we know they're going to copy their schools, universities, right? They're going to copy their speech and writing, and even like using Chinese character writing for them. In fact, that's why Japanese and Chinese writing are very similar. Now, they're very different now, but they copied the concept and the idea of that. One thing we didn't get to do this year because of how everything landed up was I have a lesson where I teach you to write some Chinese characters and strokes, and it's really fun. I love it. I love it. Unfortunately, we just couldn't do it this year because of all that happened, and it's continuing to happen. But Chinese and Japanese writing look similar, especially for those of us who don't read or write either language. Obviously, if you speak read or write Chinese or Japanese, you can tell the difference. But it's a character, stroke, and character-based writing. But they copied that. They wrote in Chinese form, often in the form of poetry. So add that to our list. They copied poetry as well. The Japanese emperors and empresses became more impressed with the grand scale that the Chinese royalty enjoyed. So all that stuff that we talked about, schools and philosophies and governments and writing and all that, now the Japanese emperors and empresses want to actually copy how the Chinese emperors lived and their lavish lifestyle. It was said that when the Chinese emperor built a capital, 2 million men were set to work, and that his fleet of pleasure boats on the Yellow River was towed by 80,000 men. If you needed to get your boat upstream, you'd have a bunch of usually slaves or people on the side of the river with big ropes attached to the boat, and they would pull the boat up the river. This is obviously before motorized boats, and it took 80,000 men to tow the Chinese emperor's fleet up the river. And the Japanese wanted to live in a similar style. They sought to live in a similar way. So rich art in the form of paintings, bronze, silk, stones, and woods were commissioned from artists taught in the Chinese influence. So again, add to our list art and all those different forms of art. So really, Japan was almost like a China 2.0 or just a China, little China or something, because they were copying so much of Chinese culture that it was very, very similar. And that still lasts today. Now it's obviously very different because it's been many years, but there was a history, just like the United States. Even though we're a couple hundred years removed from being a British colony, we still share a lot of British culture, the language, a lot of different things. But we're a very different culture now than the British, but there's a lot of similarities as well. So kind of like that. All right. So women in Japan. Women held an honorable place in early Japanese society. Though not considered an equal to men, women had many freedoms not extended to women of other early societies. Japanese women could be educated, own property, and inherit property. Now pay attention, because this is one of the questions on the quiz and you're going to take in just a couple of minutes, so pay attention. Japanese women could be educated, they could own property, and they could inherit property. Let me give you a quick story. Just a couple hundred years ago in the United States of America, this country that's supposedly very progressive and very, very modern, right? If a woman, American woman, if her husband passed away just 150 years ago or so, in many states, she was not legally allowed to own the property that her husband owned. It would go to her son if she had a son, or her husband's brother if there was no son, because women in certain states 150 years ago, a couple hundred years ago, were not allowed to own property. We just celebrated the 100-year anniversary of women's suffrage, not suffrage where they're suffering, but suffrage is a term used for voting. It's only been 100 years or so that women have been allowed to vote in our country. Did you guys know that? And I'm going to assume you're all going to go, wow, and like stroke your beards and go, I had no idea, Mr. Lane. Thank you for being so wise. But there were former male slaves that used to be considered property. Former male slaves in the United States were given the right to vote before white women were allowed to vote. So if that tells you how the United States has treated women in the past. So Japanese women could be educated, they could own property, and they could inherit the property. Some of the best books written in early Japan were from female authors writing in traditional Japanese language. This is on the quiz, pay attention, not in Chinese as the male authors preferred. Okay, that's why it's in yellow, so make sure you know that. The 54-book series, The Tale of Genji, written by Lady Murasaki, tells of what life was like as a member of the royal family in early Japan. If we were in my classroom, I'd walk over to my shelf if this is period 2, because I always forgot to get it at the end of the day. But the rest of you I'd have it on my front table there. But I have a copy of the Tales of Genji, Tale of Genji. It's an abridged version. It's not the full 54 book series, but it's a copy of that. And right now you can't see this, but I'm actually holding up my hand as if I had this. This is how trained I am. I thought I had it in my hand, and I'm holding up for you all to see. So just pretend, okay? But I have a copy of the book, and it's one of the oldest novels that we know of in history, and it was written by a woman. And again, that might not sound like a big deal now, and thankfully it's not, but it is a big deal because one of the oldest books that we know of that has survived was written by a woman. So that's pretty cool. Women were also known for their bravery. Once, a general, while fighting the white hairy barbarians, remember them from yesterday, right? The white hairy barbarians were called the what? I knew you knew the answer. You see what I did there? I knew you knew. Okay. All right. So the white-haired barbarians were about to be overrun. He had climbed over a stockade to make his getaway when his wife grabbed him and taunted him to stay. Then she gathered the other women together, and they all made plucking noises like bowstrings, like, or that's my best plucking noise. I don't know if that is. The barbarians, the Ainu, thinking there was a waiting army behind the stockade, decided to withdraw. Later, the general reorganized his troops and led them back to victory. Okay, so women were respected. They copied the Chinese culture, and all of this was because Prince Shotoku set about this motion of Chinese culture. He copied the government. He copied the philosophy, the moral conduct, and then that established, even once he passed away over the next 100 years or so, the people of China copying education, copying the government, like I already said, but copying the lifestyle of the emperors and the lavish lifestyle and all that. All right, everybody good with that? Okay, that is our lesson for the day on Prince Shotoku. Here is your code. So those of you paying attention, code is 2282. So type that in on the quiz. It's again a 6-point quiz. It's true, false, or multiple choice. Make sure you read each question carefully. You will have 2 attempts to take the quiz. So if you don't get a perfect 6 out of 6 the first time, take it again. Note the ones you got incorrect and make a change for those, okay? As always, if you have any questions, you may email me. I will be around in the morning. I think this goes live at 8 o'clock. I think we're supposed to have it by 9, but for you early birds, I have it set to go at 8 o'clock. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be sitting there with my coffee, hopefully next to my cute wife, and let me know if you can't access something, you can't get the video, or have any questions, or just want to say hey. All right. Miss you guys. Hope you're doing well. I will see you soon.